So, welcome everybody to the Women Writers Collective in Yoga Therapy. And I am Joanne Spence, and I am coming to you from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I'm delighted to have this opportunity today to be interviewing Joann Lutz about her work, Trauma Healing in the Yoga Zone. And I've been following Joann's work for a while. So I'm absolutely delighted that I get to do that this morning or this afternoon or whatever the time zone you are on. So we're going to jump right in. And I'd like to just be able to allow Joann to give some introduction to herself. We got Joann Squared today, so it could get a little confusing at times, but I think we'll sort it out since I'm the one with the Australian accent and you're the one with the Massachusetts accent. But Joann
That's right.
is Joann's a psychotherapist and a yoga therapist and an author. And there are many things that she has been doing in her long career here. And I'm gonna give some space for her to introduce herself. I don't know about you. Sometimes reading one's bio can be a little clinical, and sometimes when we get to articulate that in our own words, it can seem a little more personal. So I'm going to hand it over to Joann to introduce herself, and she's going to start with giving us a little bit of background on the practice or why we're going to be doing the practice we're doing so that we can actually get to experience it. So, Joann, welcome. We're excited that you're here, that we get to talk about you and your work today. And I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. Well, my story starts in 1970 when I was a senior in college. And it was a rough period being in college in the late 60s. So I went into a depression actually when I left school. It had just been very overwhelming. And I didn't know what to do. I'm a small town girl, grew up in Western Massachusetts. And I knew very little of spirituality. Um, but interestingly enough, this is a story I've heard before from other people that in the midst of my confusion, a book honestly dropped in front of me, which was Vedanta for the Western World. And I started reading it, and I realized that what he was talking about was exactly what I needed and to stabilize my inner world. So I started doing yoga. Fortunately, there was a great yoga teacher in my town. And so I started on my path, and I got a lot of information in a short period of time about what my purpose in life was. And I learned that it was I said to myself, if I ever feel well again, I'm going to share what I learned with people in a similar situation to myself. And I'm proud to say that I have followed through with that all these years. And so I became a social worker and then a yoga teacher with Swami Satchidananda in the Integral Yoga Institute and then became a psychotherapist and coincidentally was exposed to EMDR. So I learned about trauma and the therapists around me were buzzing about somatic experiencing. So I also took that training. And as I was sitting there, I was saying to myself, this sounds like the healing that I got from yoga so many years ago. So I started to take notes, comparing the healing that was possible in the somatic experiencing approach with what I knew about yoga. And it turned out that there were tremendous correspondences. It was such an exciting journey going back over what I had learned in yoga from Swami Satchidananda and then exploring other great teachers' works, trying to find its essence what yoga was all about. And I was more familiar with the spiritual side of yoga, which that's what I call it, through Swami Satchidananda, knowing some of his swamis. that they were doing practices to raise their Kundalini. The whole purpose of his work really was to calm the body, make it healthy, meditate, and start doing practices to awaken the Kundalini. I remember that one Swami told me that she was instructed to like imagine something pounding on the base of her spine, just like this, as she was meditating to achieve these breakthroughs. And I knew right from the start that I had no interest whatsoever in that. I didn't need to feel high. I didn't need to become enlightened. I just wanted to be happy, calm, be able to be of service, make a contribution. And that was a different path, which was not quite described back in 1970 when I started. I don't know when the term yoga therapy came into being, but I wasn't aware of it in spite of the fact that I was immersed in yoga. So, so I went back over all of that, and I became pretty clear to me that the spiritual goal of yoga was to unite the different types of prana in the body at the base of the spine and send it up through the chakras to the top of the head. And so I was happy to be clear about what the discipline really was that I had been practicing all those years. And by taking that somatic experiencing training and being exposed to the healing of the autonomic nervous system and the functioning of the autonomic nervous system, fight, flight, and the various types of freeze. That's what I realized I really needed from yoga, and I got it. And I learned why after every yoga class. I felt so good, so present, happy, relaxed. It was because my autonomic nervous system was in balance, the sympathetic and parasympathetic um, branches. And so that was the beginning, that was the genesis of this book that I now have written and had published, Trauma Healing in the Yoga Zone. So what I did in the book is I went over all of the yoga practices that I had learned all those years and practiced for many years. I did it every morning for years, and also new information from neuroscience research and new practices that were coming out of this fascination with nervous system regulation. And so I began to create a course also. And I was very lucky. I presented my course, which I created for psychotherapists primarily, although other types of therapists took it also, because that's what I knew. And so the course was bringing trauma sensitive yoga into mental health care. And I taught it for an organization called PESI for 5 years all over the United States. And I'm proud of that because I think that is, in addition to the book, that's my major contribution. Anyway, so this is all a prelude to doing the exercise that I want to do with you. Because we can actually experience for ourselves what it feels like to be dysregulated and what it feels like to be regulated. And you may all be very familiar with this already, I realize, because in a short period of time, the interest in this approach has blossomed. There are, every day I see new trainings and new lectures on the topic of nervous system regulation.
Mhm,
So,
mhm,
and yoga too. I mean, I hope I'm not talking too much, but never in my wildest dreams did I imagine that yoga would have the place in our lives and in our culture that it has. And so many forms of yoga would have proliferated. It's truly amazing from over these past 50 years. Anyway, so this is very simple. So what I'm going to suggest is that we do one posture that seems to activate the sympathetic branch, and then one posture that seems to allow the parasympathetic release. And then you can examine your own experience and see what you think and what you find. So, mm, so you can start just by sitting up straight or, you know, getting your body into a balanced position, no matter what it is, and take a few breaths, which I'm going to do too. 3 breaths. And we can start with the sympathetically activating posture, which in this case can be a simple seated cobra pose. So I'm positioning myself now so I can place the palms of my hands on my thighs or knees, sitting up straight, inhaling, exhale, and then you inhale again. As you inhale again, you can slowly arch the spine, bringing the shoulder blades closer to each other in the center of your back, and the chin will naturally raise. So take a few, now my eyes closed, but that's not necessary. Just take a few breaths in that pose and notice how your body feels. Okay, one more inhale. And a slow exhale as you release the shoulders, release the spine, sitting up straight again, taking a breath. And now we're going to do you can stand up if you want, but I'm suggesting a seated full forward bend. The seated posture is more parasympathetically oriented in my experience. So again, you can inhale, and as you exhale, slowly, it's a full forward bend starting from the waist, bringing your torso down over your legs. And if you have any heart condition or high blood pressure, you can stop about halfway down towards your legs. Otherwise, you can bring your torso all the way down to the legs, letting the head hang, consciously releasing the shoulders, releasing any facial tension, any tension that you notice. And we'll take 3 more breaths in that position. You can actually have your knees apart if you are having trouble inhaling fully in this seated position. It'll provide space for your abdomen. So perhaps 1 more breath, although you can release the pose anytime you want. Okay, and at the bottom of your exhale, you can slowly start to inhale and bring the torso up. Start and slowly, slowly raising the torso back to a seated position, bringing your head back straight in line with the spine. So that is a really basic example of a sympathetically activating posture and parasympathetically. So what I describe as sympathetically activating includes the necessity for holding muscle tension, for holding a focus, for being into a pose willfully. These are all aspects of movement that can increase sympathetic activation. Of course, if you feel very, very safe, it may not increase it that much. But maybe the typical person who comes in for yoga therapy or psychotherapy may not be quite so comfortable with yoga or with you or me, and so may not get much of a relaxation effect from that sympathetically oriented pose. So I don't know if you can remember what it felt like to just hold the muscles in a certain position and then releasing that in the full forward bend. There's no effort required. The muscles are relaxing due to the pull of gravity. Um, so you can, for me, there's much more of a relaxing effect. I don't know if that's true for you. You can put comments in the chat. I think if the chat is activated, um, if you'd like to write about your experience. But that's what I have been getting at in this approach to yoga, to this approach to yoga therapy, is that there are certain poses that are more that increase parasympathetic activation more. And also depends how long the poses are held, what effort is used to hold them, how safe a person feels, and what the intention is of them doing that practice in the first place. So there are specific factors or guidelines that come with this kind of nervous system approach. So what I did in the book and in my research is I took all the practices that I knew and I analyzed them to determine what effect they would have on the autonomic nervous system, although it does vary from person to person somewhat. So I did that with the pranayama also, with yoga nidra, and a little bit with meditation. Yeah, so Joanne, I don't know if you're bursting with a question to ask me, if I should just keep talking because I enjoy conversations. It's just such
Yes.
an
Yeah.
unusual opportunity to talk about my work here. So, um,
Yes.
mhm.
Why don't we just take a pause for a moment so we can just take in what you've just said and the effect of that lovely short practice. We take a few breaths together. And thank you for that introduction to your work. There's always a personal component. It seems to me, always a personal component to why we embark on these big projects in life. But before I go into some more in-depth questions that you've already so wonderfully leading us into, I just want to let people know that we're about 20 past the hour, whatever time zone you're in. We'll be doing this interview till the next, for me on Eastern time will be 1 p.m. And we've allowed about 30 minutes for questions. So if you have questions then and want to make a note or put them in the chat, Liz will be monitoring that. Thank you so much, Liz, for doing that. So um, let shall we go? Shall we take it a bit deeper, Joanne? I'm interested in so many things about your book. I happen to have a copy here. If you didn't see that on the website, a really interesting cover. And I noticed that you're deliberately using the language of the nervous system, and that you've in fact developed something that you've called nervous system informed trauma sensitive yoga. And I'd love to hear why that distinction was important to you, and then perhaps explaining that in practical terms.
Okay. I mean, the distinction between nervous system informed and trauma sensitive, is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, and why you brought those things. It seems like something has probably, I would imagine from practice and observation that you've brought these things together.
hmm Yeah. Well, I did study trauma sensitive yoga with Dr. Bessel van der Kolk and his staff in the around 2005. It was one of the early trainings that he did. And I was overjoyed because I had always wished, my degree's in social work, but I did go into psychotherapy. I'd always wished that there was a path for me to bring yoga into my work without feeling like a rebel or stepping outside of the mm, agreed upon definition of therapy, and he provided it. So I felt that
Mm,
that was my, my opportunity to start really flying with it. Um, and when I finished the training, you may know that work. It's lovely. I think the concept of um, giving people permission, or I'm trying to think of the phrase that they use in their work. Um, it's a special wording that allows people to make their own decisions.
hmm
Um, and that's particularly important and powerful. So they broke open a kind of approach to yoga, which was more authoritarian. Not all yoga, but the kind of yoga that I had experienced. And
mm,
so it was fabulous, but I felt that it didn't really give me direction in terms of which poses were the most beneficial for certain people in certain situations. So it left something lacking. And that's what I tried to fill in. And
hmm
it meshed very well with these revelations that came to me while I was sitting and taking the somatic experiencing training. Because they were all about, I didn't know about polyvagal theory when I started that somatic experiencing training for some reason, even though the founder, Peter Levine, was very close to Stephen Porges, the founder of polyvagal theory. They didn't mention that at all in the somatic experiencing training, but I did learn about it. And so, see where my train of thought was going. So it just seemed natural to me to start to um, consolidate the two uh, practices, the two disciplines of yoga and the nervous system approach. And I still feel that way. I'm a little I'm a little disappointed when I see trainings that only cover the trauma sensitive approach because it's more limited. So I mean, it's wonderful to recognize that each person is carrying their own wounds, and the practice has to be tailored to them and have them increase their own empowerment. But I still felt that it wasn't enough in a maybe in a clinical kind of way. So
In the chat, Lumore is reminding us that that it's inviting language might be the term that you were searching for.
yes, thank you. Invitational language. Yeah. Um,
I think that's a, a good segue into what I was thinking about, Joanne, is what do you think that people misunderstand about nervous system functioning that is addressed through the work that you're talking about, through somatic work, through yoga practice and yoga postures?
oh, well, I'm not saying that anyone misunderstands anything. It's just there's not a focus on the effect on the nervous system of each pose or each practice. And of course, as time goes on, there are more and more, teachers expanding their work to include the nervous system states. But it's not that prevalent in yoga, as far as I know. Like in yoga teacher trainings, I don't, things may be changing fast, so that may not be true. But
So I'm wondering how, and you talk about this in your book, but how would someone know that their nervous system is becoming more flexible and responsive?
hmm. Well, I'm thinking of the window of tolerance diagram now, which
Mhm.
some people may or may not be familiar with, but it's a diagram with two horizontal lines which delineate a space where the nervous system feels safe and resourced in between the lines, and then above the line is getting into the area of sympathetic over arousal and perhaps anxiety or panic. And then below the line is the area where the parasympathetic may be shutting down. So that's the area of dysthymia or depression. So this window of tolerance brings together um, nervous system states and the idea of safety. And so yeah. So if a person's window of tolerance is getting wider and wider, and the areas of dysregulation are getting smaller, then they know that their nervous system is getting more resourced. For example, let's say someone is afraid to drive on a certain superhighway. And after a period of time of training and becoming present and practicing various um, yoga practices with support in a safe environment, they may find that they can drive easily without that kind of panic or anxiety. So I mean, that's just an example. That would be true in many, many different areas of life. So
So
that's
this idea, yeah, so this idea of being able to toggle between the different parts of the nervous system um, seems to be a evidence of a regulated nervous system.
well, I would say that, there's a diagram that describes like a perfectly regulated nervous system, which probably doesn't exist for too long, but it's a wave. And that
Mm,
wave is also present in the window of tolerance. And
mm,
so the the wave indicates at the top of the wave, the sympathetic energies are the most potent, and at the bottom of the wave, the parasympathetic sympathetic energies are the most powerful in the body. And this wave goes on and on and on. Every time we take a breath, on the inhale, the sympathetic energies are activated. And then on the exhale, the parasympathetic energies are activated. So there's a natural balance that happens as we breathe, which influences our heartbeat, the space between the beats, and it influences other rhythms in the body. And so that's another way of looking at regulation. Is heart rate variability is one of the um, methods of measuring how regulated a person is, and that can be done in a medical setting. Or I guess some people now have watches and other
hmm
uh, technology that shows them whether their what their heart rate variability is. So, which I'm about to get a watch like that. So I'm breaking into the technological side of this work. Um,
I've been resisting that for a while.
oh, you have? Okay. That's interesting.
So,
Hey, if anyone
so,
out there
so,
knows how to work one of these watches, give me your
Mhm.
email address. Um,
So
but
Joanne, I'm thinking that there's lots of people on the call are coming from all sorts of different disciplines, and you've brought this pairing of coming in as a social worker, as a psychotherapist, and um, and I'm wondering that this is a twofold question of how being a yoga therapist has changed the way you practice psychotherapy, and also in the reverse, how has being a psychotherapist changed the way you teach yoga? And I
hmm,
think practical examples of what that looks like for you, like breaking it down into um, your professional life, what that looks like
hmm,
on a
sure.
day-to-day basis.
Yeah. Well, I can give you a few specific examples. See, my work, particularly since I took that training with Dr. Vanderkolk, the work was very integrated. And I couldn't separate my awarenesses from the psychotherapy training from the way I was teaching yoga. They're very integrated. However, I can give you a couple of examples. One of them is that what I believe is the most effective is for the whatever kind of therapist or teacher you are, to notice the uh, state of regulation of the client or patient. There are tests, if you're trained, there are ways to be able to tell, noticing the tension in the facial musculature, the sound of the voice, breathing pattern, just, the way people hold their whole body. And so um, there are moments when someone may be talking about something that's very difficult for them or a trauma from the past, where their body language will change. Some of these signs of dysregulation will become apparent. And at that point, I suggest stopping whatever the practice is that you're engaged in with them and having them go back to the breath. And then you can tune more into specific suggestions based on what's happening for them in the moment. I think the breath is a major one, but it could be also a postural change, um, or a suggestion to look around the room, just to use the eyes as a regulating force, which is something that is part of yoga, but it hasn't been developed as much as it has in the somatic experiencing world, the importance of the gaze. So that means being aware of as much as possible what the client's nervous system where they're at, choosing some intervention and having interventions all throughout the session, interrupting whatever else is happening to get down to that basic level of creating regulation and safety for them. And it may be a little jarring to someone who's used to a more traditional class or more traditional therapy to be interrupted. But to me, that's the way to start to train the nervous system to get back into that window of tolerance over and over again. And eventually, the person might what's the word? I don't know, integrate that into their life so that it just happens. I mean, I have been, I have a tendency to be an anxious person. So I do these kind of practices all day long myself. I've been doing them for years, of like stopping, noticing my breath,
Mhm.
deepening the breath, looking around. So that way, I can provide the stability and the regulation that I need. And I think that in different types of therapy, that's the answer for someone to really make the fastest and deepest progress is to be able to have the tools to be able to regulate themselves. Because these sessions are, or groups are an hour or two a week, and then a person's on their own the rest of the time. And I really believe that a 24-hour practice will revolutionize a person's life. So
So if
that's one.
somebody was in a session with you, these interventions are the things you mentioned of connecting, stopping and reminding someone to connect to their breath or this connecting with the senses. These would be the interventions that they would practice in the moment and then take with
Right.
them to practice in an ongoing way throughout
Yes.
their day.
Yeah. And I had particular success, for example, if clients of mine couldn't sleep, I'd tell them about the different resources that each nostril has. Taken from Swara Yoga, which I think is very important, which may be not that well known yet. And so if they breathe only through their left nostril and lie on their right side, the parasympathetic energies will become much stronger and they can fall asleep without taking medication. And that I had
Mhm.
some clients who really appreciated that and it really worked for them. So that's another example of using yoga, you know, maybe some aspects of yoga that aren't that well known, to make a big difference in someone's life. And to,
I'm just
you
making a
know,
note of that. I'm making a note of that
right.
on my right side so I can sleep more easily tonight.
Oh,
Well,
great. Well, it's in the book too, but that makes sense. Some of these yoga inspired practices are known to Western medicine, but nothing is made of them. And so yoga could start to influence Western medicine more deeply if some of these practices were known, because the research bears them out. You know,
hmm
like for example, there is a rhythm that's where the left nostril is more open than the right for a certain number of hours in all
mm,
of us. And then the nostril dominant switches to the other side for a certain number of hours. And Western medicine knows about that, doesn't make anything out of it. But in yoga,
mm,
it is very significant because on the subtle level, the Ida, which is the same definition as the parasympathetic nervous system in the ancient texts, the Ida is one of the subtle channels that ends in the left nostril, and the Pingala is one of the subtle channels that ends in the right nostril. So when for example, when you do alternate nostril breathing, you're balancing your subtle energy as well as your physical uh, uh, sympathetic channels. And who knows if they're not already integrated with each other, but that's a whole nother story. Um, so let's see. Sometimes I get so excited I lose my train of thought.
well, let me pull that together because one of the things that I think is really stands out in your book is this weaving together of Raja Yoga, nervous system anatomy and physiology, and neuropsychological research and your somatic psychotherapy. And it sounds like that as you've been weaving that together and integrating it, it's um, in service of elevating, particularly the ancient practices, I heard you say a couple of times about different functions of the nervous system and what the ancient yogis already know about sympathetic and
Mhm.
parasympathetic. They might not have used that language, and we make
Right,
nothing of it in Western medicine when it's
right.
like, you mean that helps me sleep better? Shouldn't that be on a billboard somewhere?
Yeah.
And
Well,
it seems like that's been really important. And you're going more deeply into yoga philosophy in your
mm,
book. So maybe you want to, because you
yeah,
talked more
I can,
about aspects of
yes.
classical yoga that
Yeah,
might have been
I'd like
overlooked.
to do that. Like to do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so I call it independent research for maybe about 5 years, reading different texts, trying to put it all together, understand everything about yoga that I could. Because Satchidananda only taught us a certain piece of it. For example, when he taught alternate nostril breathing, he told us to always exhale through the right nostril to finish the practice. Exhale through the right. But I never asked him why. I don't know why I never asked him why. I'm sorry now. But in my studies of the subtle nervous system, I learned, and the somatic experiencing, I learned why you always exhale on the right in his work. And it's because the right nostril is associated with the sympathetic nervous system, which is more reality oriented, or if you have to go out and drive your car after the session, you're better off having the sympathetic side of your nervous system more in charge. So there are a lot of suggestions that he made like that were consistent with the functioning of the autonomic nervous system, but he didn't talk about it. Maybe he hadn't made those connections himself. And so
Mm,
it's been tremendously exciting for me to like understand why. And I discovered all of that by
mm,
myself. And
mm.
it was very, very exciting. If anyone's one of the questions that some people ask me is, what was it like writing this book? And that's what it was like. It was like, oh my God, look at that. And
Mm,
another example is the gunas. I noticed that the sympathetic, parasympathetic, and the balance of the two of them, which is a regulated nervous system, are very similar to Rajas and Tamas and Sattva.
mm,
Rajas being a kind of, I mean, when it's functioning normally, it's doing its job, but when it gets overactivated, a person is jumpy and, is hyper and hot, too hot. And these are all also um, characteristics of an overactivated sympathetic nervous system. And then the tamas is kind of dull and shut down. And I'm like, damn, isn't that a lot like depression? So slowly this whole system started to make sense. But at the time, I was lecturing to mostly psychotherapists and physical therapists, and I was, in hotel rooms, and I was like, I can't start talking about the gunas to this group. They're going to think I'm really crazy. But then, so I didn't. And then a few months later, I read that an article had been published. Um, Oh, I'm not remembering her name. She's a member of this group, but she's a physical therapist. She it was the key author of this article. Somebody could look it up online for me. And Dr. Porges had signed on. Thank you, Marlisa Sullivan. I love to get help from my friends here. So she wrote the article, and Dr. Porges signed onto it, saying the exact same thing, that they were equating the gunas with the different nervous system states. And then I started teaching it in these lectures. Um, because there was a powerful research article authored by these pioneers that were saying the same thing. So that's a good example of how I um, tried to integrate traditional yoga terms that are not household terms into healing, into this nervous system. I'm hoping that
I'm interested, yeah, and I'm interested in knowing how that was received by you. You said you were doing that for Passy,
right,
who we also now know as a book publisher. How
right,
was your audience of? I'm assuming it was probably social workers and psychotherapists and counselors.
yeah.
How was it received? How were they? Did you lead them in some practices? Were they
Oh
curious?
yes, oh yes, yeah. I created scripts of the chair yoga postures, breathing practices, and yoga nidra, and had them teach each other those practices in the context of a big hotel room, hotel ballroom. Because, I was walking a fine line, I admit, between letting people who were not yoga teachers or yoga therapists use these tools. And so I did it very carefully. I suggested that they use the scripts if they wanted to introduce any of these practices into their work, if they weren't yoga teachers. I don't know how, I mean, my evaluations were fine. I was sorry that more people didn't come up to me and talk to me about, you know, questions and or excitement or whatever. Some did. And
Mm,
one of my but Petsy seemed to be fine with it as long as I don't want to say anything bad about it, but there's a lot of interest in being successful in Pessy. So I think
mm,
as long as people wanted to take these courses, they were happy. Um,
hmm
yeah.
hmm
But so one of the people who took one of these courses, who was a psychotherapist, she got very excited about it, and she went on and became a yoga teacher, which a lot of
mm,
people have. And
hmm
and then now she started a entirely volunteer organization it's in Denver, but it's international, combining somatic practices, somatic therapy, yoga, and grief. So,
Mm.
yeah, so I'm proud of that. So, some people, in other words, really got turned on and it changed their life direction. But I
Mm.
don't know that, I don't know really exactly what the impact was. Um,
Sometimes we just have to do the work and trust that it will reach the people that it needs to reach and do the work, whatever that looks like in them.
yeah,
But
yeah,
sometimes we never know. Sometimes you
yeah,
never know.
yeah. It's okay. Um, I do what
But
I can.
I'm also wondering, I was reading I'm not sure which chapter it was, but you were talking about the difference between yoga for spiritual development and therapeutic yoga. And that was very juicy for me. And if you'd like to speak a little more to that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I did talk about it already a little bit today.
Mm-hmm.
The difference between the clear path toward um, opening, raising the Kundalini and opening the chakras. That's what yoga
Mm.
was to me in the earlier years. But
Mm.
as I said, I never cared about that. I just wanted stability, basically, and peace and harmony and joy. And um, yeah, I don't know if anyone else has a much more information than I do about how the yoga therapy discipline developed, but I'm not sure when it actually took off as a recognizable discipline, maybe in the 1980s. So, I mean, by reframing it for myself as a way to be regulated, as a way to be healthy, as a way to overcome trauma, as a way to grow and, expand one's ability to do things. And, it's a natural life process. I mean, ideally to grow and expand as we continue to live. But, I think, yoga can play a major role. I've always thought that it was the most subversive activity that was happening in the United States, that someone, this is a little bit off the topic, but someone could take a yoga class in a gym and it could start to open up different chakras and make new energy connections inside of them and open their heart. And soon their attitudes might be changing and they may start feeling love for people. And it could affect the way they vote. And just, I mean, I have a little bit of this revolutionary fervor that, yoga is one vehicle to really create a more beautiful society. And I feel that
Mm.
way about somatic work also and nervous system regulation. I think it has the potential to change the world. And I hold on to that wish and that energy. Um,
Mm.
if only governments would embrace this kind of approach, policies could be made that would increase people's feeling of safety in their body and in their life and in the world. And that is the most important element of all. When someone feels
Mm.
safe, their nervous system automatically regulates itself. And
Mm.
but but in order to feel safe, it has to be regulated. So it's a little bit of a catch-22. But
Mm.
yeah. So anyway, you asked me about the difference between the spiritual path of yoga and the nervous system regulation mm, goal of yoga. And let's see if there's anything else I can think of. Hmm. Well, There has been a little bit of a negative feeling across the centuries in yoga, a little bit about the sexuality and the senses. It's been a very extremely tight, disciplined kind of path traditionally, and a lot of the um, teachers developed their work originally for, like Swami Shivananda, for example, teaching young men who were intending to become swamis themselves. So this, this yoga has changed. And I think the nervous system approach allows that expansion, but still giving yoga um, its, what's the word? Um, its dignity,
Mm,
still giving it its power and its transformational abilities, but in a different direction. Maybe
mm,
more of, yeah, more of just of integration and living like, I don't know. I don't want to make too many generalities. So, um,
mm.
but I guess it would be good if I could think of other examples, maybe from the book, or if you can, that would illustrate this difference. Um,
Well,
so,
as you said, I think you have touched on some of the in our earlier part of our conversation, and um, I'm also aware that time is flying by, and
oh,
I want to be able to. I had this great question to ask you about what you were hoping after all these years of studying the nervous system and psychotherapy and yoga about what gives you hope, and you just answered that by it seems like you were saying that your hope is that there's more integration into the healthcare system, this understanding of something that the ancient yogis already knew.
I'm absolutely convinced that they were very familiar with the functioning of the autonomic nervous system. There's no doubt about that. Yeah. And I guess the way they integrated that into spiritual development is really extraordinary too. See, I'm believing that a person, this is just my personal belief that someone should be regulated before they delve into the most esoteric practices that will change their energy structure and bring the Kundalini up to the top of the head. That regulation is like a prerequisite. I don't know if
Mm,
the ancient swamis would agree with me, but I do believe that. And there earlier in the last century, there were a lot of people who I knew, like in the 70s, who tried very intense, breathing practices and lifestyle and eating habits, and they dysregulated themselves very intensely. And
mm,
so that has influenced my reasoning about that.
mm,
So because of that, if I was working with traumatized people, I would keep their focus on the body. Even in yoga nidra, I would teach part of it, maybe the progressive deep relaxation part, but I wouldn't go into long periods of time where their mind is free
mhm,
in a very relaxed state, free to go wherever it goes, because to me until they're really solid and grounded and regulated, it could bring up their greatest unhealed trauma. So I'm a very
mhm,
conservative yoga teacher, yoga therapist at the same
mm.
time. Yeah.
Yeah, I
So,
loved your yoga nidra script. I've worked with veterans myself, and um, that mostly were in an inpatient setting. So that knowing when we like silence and when that might not be appropriate for somebody with a particular um, predispositional depression or anxiety or PTSD.
yeah.
And that we have tools for that in practices like yoga nidra, and that they in fact can be adapted. And you've done a beautiful job of adapting those and providing us with some practical tools in the scripts that are in your book.
Thank you.
So, so I just want to give a little bit of space, and as I said, some of the questions that I had prepared, you would answer them before I asked you, and I'm like, that's amazing. But I do want to give a bit of space in case there's something you wish that I had asked you in this hour that I haven't, that you would like to just speak to or comment on before we come into our time opening up to a time of questions for
Thank you.
you.
That's a lovely opportunity. Well, I have been a little frustrated because I would have liked, or I would like to be able to do research to get, have research subjects in different body postures, different breathing practices, and actually measure what it's doing with their autonomic nervous system.
Mm,
If what I'm teaching and what the general feeling is really scientifically validated. And
mm,
so I haven't been able to do that. In my own little way, I went to a few university physiology labs, and as of now, they haven't taken me up on the idea. But I did notice that there's the first study that I've ever seen that was done called it's about spinal flexion and extension-based yoga postures and their effect on the autonomic nervous system activity. It's an article that just was published recently in the International Journal of Yoga. So,
mm,
you can find it online. I just have little sketchy notes here. I didn't take down the whole citation. But that's the beginning. And their results, it was a very small study. It wasn't, they didn't have a control group. And so their results were more or less inconclusive. But I also realized that they used 40 participants who had been doing yoga for a couple of years. And I was thinking that if people, are yogis and they've been doing these postures for a couple of years, their sympathetic nervous system probably wouldn't get very activated anyway because they're feeling so good in their body and so safe doing the postures. So, that probably, I guess I would use research subjects who weren't that familiar with yoga. So anyway, if
mhm.
anyone out there has a physiology lab or knows someone who has a physiology lab who might want to do some research, please let me know. That would be fabulous. Oh, thank you for that reference. That's fabulous, Liz. I really appreciate it. Yeah, so I do keep up with the research as much as possible. And
Mm.
yeah, so um I don't know, I could end with an inspiring moment. This
Please.
Well, it's not exactly related to sympathetic and parasympathetic, but I went to India in only once in 1985 to try to learn as much as I could about yoga, like what's the secret of yoga. And the closest I came was sitting by the Ganges with Swami Rama, who was the founder of the Himalayan Institute. And he
Mm,
was talking to us, and we were just sitting in the sun, and all of a sudden, this wave of relaxation, it was palpable to me and to everyone, just uh, passed over us. And he stopped talking in the middle of a sentence, and we all went into a deep meditation together. And so I recall that experience every time I talk about it. It feels good. So that was the clearest answer that I got on that trip as far as what is yoga, this wave of peace.
mm, mm. I love that. A
Thank you.
wave of peace.
Yeah.
Well, perhaps we can just pause there for a moment and just take in all of that lusciousness from your book. And just give people a moment. I see that things have been coming up in the comments. But maybe we can just take a little transition here. And Liz, if you want to let us know if there's specific questions in the comments, or if this is a good time and you've been thinking of something you would like to ask Joanne, or in response to something that she said, we would love to hear that, to do that. So just as a reminder, July 28th is our next author spotlight, and that will be Lamar Clements, and it will be looking at her book, Exploring the Koshas in Yoga Therapy. And just as a reminder, there is a new website, and the recordings for these sessions will be up on that website, and that is where you can go to listen to the recording. And that is yogatherapybookclub.com.